Have you ever had a friendship or a work relationship just completely fall apart and you're left scratching your head wondering what on earth just happened? Well, it often comes down to these invisible cultural rules that are running in the background of all our interactions. Today, we're going to dive deep into one of those stories, a real-life implosion, to see what we can all learn from it. This is the big question at the heart of our story. It's what a manager named Ian asked himself after his friendship and his entire professional relationship with a colleague just shattered. And, it's a question a lot of us have probably asked at some point. So today, we're actually going to find the answer. So let me introduce you to our two main characters, Ian, a New Zealander, and Felix, a Chinese migrant. Their story starts off great, a friendship built on the sidelines of their daughter's soccer games. But it ends in a formal, tense mediation that honestly solves nothing. So, how did it get there?
Okay, let's start with section 1. A friendship falls apart. Before we can figure out what went wrong, we've got to understand how their relationship started and, crucially, the moment everything changed.
All right, so here's the setup. Ian is a new manager at a nonprofit. Felix, who's from Beijing, is a super skilled doctor, but because his qualifications aren't recognized yet, he's working as a health counselor. They meet because their daughters are on the same soccer team, and they hit it off. Ian kind of becomes a mentor to Felix, helping him figure out life in New Zealand. This friendship is what leads Ian to help Felix get a full-time job at his nonprofit. And that is the exact moment the ground shifts beneath their feet, because Ian goes from being a friend and mentor to being Felix's boss.
So, for our second section, we're going to need a cultural toolkit. Because to really get what happened here, we can't just look at the events on the surface. We need the right tools to see the hidden stuff happening underneath.
The answer to Ian's big question, why did it go so wrong? It's not about who was right or wrong. It's all about those invisible, unconscious rules of culture. And to crack that code, we're going to use a really powerful framework. And that framework is Hofstede's Dimensions of Culture. Now, don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Think of it as a way of mapping out the deep-seated values that shape everything, from how you'd run a meeting to how you handle a simple disagreement. For Ian and Felix, one of these dimensions is absolutely critical. And here it is, the core of the problem. On one side, you've got direct communication, which is pretty common in places like New Zealand. It's all about the task. You see a problem, you say the problem, you fix the problem. That's Ian. But on the other side, you have indirect communication, which is much more common in Chinese culture. The goal there isn't just solving the task, it's protecting the relationship. You hint at problems, you talk around them, anything to maintain harmony. This single difference is the source of pretty much every misunderstanding that's about to happen. Okay, section 3, unpacking the conflict. Now that we have our cultural toolkit, let's get back to the story and watch exactly how these two different styles crashed into each other. It's like a perfect storm.
So, the first crack appears. Ian notices Felix is getting a little sloppy with his paperwork, which is a big deal for his contract. So being a manager, he does what he thinks is normal. He calls a meeting to address it head-on in his very direct style.
And this is Felix's response. Now to Ian, this sounds like he's just dodging responsibility, right? Blaming the old manager. But if we put our cultural glasses on, we can see what Felix is really doing. He's using classic indirect communication. He brings in a third person, Cynthia, as a way to gently point out the issue without directly confronting his boss, who is also his friend. He's trying to preserve harmony.
And this gets us to the incredibly important idea of face, or mianzi. And this is way more than just ego or feeling embarrassed. It's about your social standing, your reputation, your moral character. So, when Ian directly criticized Felix, even though he meant well, he unintentionally caused Felix to lose a huge amount of face. And that doesn't just bring shame to Felix, it damages the entire relationship. Okay, the next incident takes things from bad to way, way worse. Ian is in a super confidential meeting about firing another Chinese employee. Felix's office is right next door. He overhears what's going on, and he bursts into the room, demanding to be part of the conversation.
From Ian's perspective, this is just insane. It's a massive breach of professional trust. But to understand why Felix did it, you have to understand guanxi. Think of it as this complex web of relationships and obligations that connects everyone. Felix didn't just see Ian as a manager, he saw him as a friend in his network. He probably felt he had an obligation to his Chinese colleague, and that his friendship with Ian gave him the right to be in that room.
Ian's solution to this whole confidentiality mess is a practical one. Move Felix's office. He thinks he's just solving a logistical problem. But this turns out to be the final nail in the coffin.
Just look at the difference in perspective here. It's night and day. Ian sees this as a win-win. We'll put him in a shared office, he can collaborate, build teamwork, but for Felix, this was an absolute catastrophe. As a highly qualified doctor, being told to share an office with younger, less experienced people wasn't collaboration. It was a public demotion. It was a massive, devastating loss of status and face.
And this hypersensitivity to status, well, it has a name. It's another one of Hofstede's dimensions, called the Power Distance Index. Basically, cultures with a high power distance, like China, really value hierarchy and status. A perceived demotion isn't just about where you sit, it's a direct challenge to your place in the social order. New Zealand, on the other hand, has a very low score. They prefer things to be more flat and egalitarian.
So, moving to Section 4, Beyond the Office Drama. You might be listening to this thinking, okay, what a mess for those two guys. But their story is actually a small snapshot of a massive global trend that affects millions and millions of us every single day.
Get this. In 2020, there were 281 million international migrants. That means 281 million people living outside their home country, having to navigate totally new cultural contexts, day in and day out.
And these intercultural interactions are happening everywhere, on a huge scale. The United States leads the pack, but you see Germany, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the UK. Workplaces and communities all over the globe are getting more and more diverse, and that makes being able to navigate these cultural differences absolutely essential.
The bottom line is, whether you're at a local market, in a giant multinational company, or a tiny nonprofit like Ian and Felix's, our lives are more and more tangled up with people who are, let's say, running different cultural software in the background. Understanding that software isn't some fuzzy soft skill anymore. It's a critical, must-have competency for the modern world.
All right, so what's the big lesson here? What can we pull from the wreckage of Ian and Felix's story to use in our own lives? Let's boil it all down. First, and this is the big one, what feels totally normal and logical to you might be deeply offensive to someone else. Ian's directness and Felix's indirectness were both correct inside their own cultural frameworks. Second, learn to read the signs. If someone brings up a third person, don't just assume they're passing the buck. It could be a really skillful, harmony-saving way to raise a touchy subject. Third, always ask, is the relationship or the task more important here? For Felix, their friendship, their guangxi, was everything. For Ian, the job and the contract rules were paramount. And finally, being competent here isn't about memorizing a bunch of rules for every culture. It's just about building a new habit. It's about pausing, and before you react, asking yourself one simple question. What if their cultural software is just different from mine? And that's what I want to leave you with. Ian and Felix were both good people. They were both acting rationally, based on their own cultural programming. The tragedy is that neither one could see the code the other person was running. So what about you? What are the invisible, unwritten rules that guide how you talk, how you work, how you argue? And how might those rules look to someone with a completely different operating system?